Ambassador Frank G. Wisner, former Ambassador of the United States to India. Richard Gowan, Associate Director at the Center on International Cooperation, New York University. James Straub, columnist at foreignpolicy.com, America's leading online publication for foreign affairs. Dr. Walter Anderson, Director of the South Asia Studies Program in the School of Advanced International Studies. And Maruf Raza, Strategic Affairs Analyst with Times Now. You're watching the first News Hour debate on the News Hour New York edition with Arnab Goswami.
From Washington, I'm joined by Dr. Walter Anderson. Dr. Anderson, good evening. He's Director of the South Asia Studies Program at the School of Advanced International Studies. In our studios here, we have Ambassador Frank Wisner, former U.S. Ambassador to India. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining me on the show. And to his left and to my right, Richard Gowan, Associate Director of the Center on International Cooperation at NYU. Thank you very much, Richard. Good to see you. Maruf Raza is with me this evening. Thanks. Shake your hand again. Thank you for staying on with our programs. And Richard Gowan is Associate Director. James Straub is columnist for foreignpolicy.com. Thank you very much, James.
A pleasure.
Thank you for coming in. James, let me begin with you. Do you feel at this point of time when one heard Barack Obama at the UNGA, there seemed to be a sense of confusion and helplessness?
Well, I want to start with something that you said, because you asked a lot of provocative questions. But the premise of the questions is that the world is a mess because the United States didn't do the right thing. Therefore, it's a sign that the war on terror has failed. Yes. I think I probably would agree with you about a lot of the failures, but I'm not convinced that the reason why ISIS is flourishing and we have the violence and chaos we have is because the United States didn't do the right thing. I think one of the lessons you get from this is that the American hope that that somehow the United States could transform the political life of countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, it didn't work. I don't know that the United States has the instruments in its power to drain the swamp in the way that it thought it would, to bring justice and prosperity and stability to these broken countries. Those underlying problems are what's creating terrorism. The United States, it's true, does not have the ability to do much about it.
Well, that's okay, Maruf, I just like to say that then why did America get into the first place? And Richard, we are speaking exactly 13 years after George Bush launched this whole war on terrorism. It wasn't meant at that point of time to be a half-baked operation.
No, and I think there was turned out to be a lot of delusion in it. Now, you also said it's been a success from the point of view of the United States, which is true. And so when we say it's been a failure, we have to be clear about what that means. In the same sense, I think, as in India, in the aftermath of your own apocalyptic terror attack in the Taj Hotel, there have not been bad terror attacks since then, therefore success. From the point of view of the United States, whatever you say about the chaos in the world that the U.S. has not been able to control, it's been a success from the point of view of there not having been further terror attacks.
Well, okay, Maruf wanted to come in on that.
I'd like to sort of give a rejoinder or a rebuttal to some of the points that you made. The first being that there is a book now, amongst many others, which clearly argues that America went after the wrong enemy in Afghanistan. And this was my hunch from day one after 9/11, that your true enemy and your problems lay in Pakistan. But America, as a knee-jerk reaction, which would be the case in almost all other countries if you had an attack the size of 9/11, that you quickly wanted to be able to be seen to be decisive. And therefore you went in knowing that some of the sanctuaries did exist in Afghanistan, because the truth is that America knew from the very beginning, and in some cases condoned the creation of sanctuaries in Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan, which they knew what they were going after, but it was probably an article of faith, when some of the others may dispute me here, that an article of faith that you couldn't go into Pakistan because Pakistan had nuclear weapons, and therefore what do you do with a nuclear weapon state except mollycoddle them? I mean, look at the case of North Korea. So, I mean, there's one problem there. The second is, and we're going now to Mr. Obama's speech, President Obama seemed to want to reverse the tide of the Bush era by not having boots on the ground. And clearly, as it's being seen with the ISIS, It's even now too little, too late.
Well, you know, Maruf, I just want to get in Ambassador Frank Weisner and Richard also into this, because the reason I said this, that Obama seemed helpless, was because Obama kept saying, when he spoke to the UNGA, he said that we need to fight the global war on terrorism as a global coalition, right? All the countries there, anyone who is with ISIS is on the other side. It sounds very George Bush-like. But have global concerns ever been on America's agenda? Or is it an extremely sort of narrow-focused point of view? Because a global war on terror has to achieve and resolve global concerns, not just American concerns. And the reason what Maruf says, as a case in point from the Indian perspective, that you're about to exit from Afghanistan 2 years from now, leaving behind a bigger mess than when you came in. Ambassador.
Well, I have a long list of things I could take issue with, and I won't attempt to do that. Let me make a couple of, I think, rather important points to get the debate back on track. First of all, I believe the President is absolutely right in saying this is a global undertaking. Because what the President is really saying to all of us is that the war against terror is not just a military struggle. It's a profoundly political undertaking. That if you don't have a consensus among the nations of the region in the first instance and the broader global community, that this use of terror and violent, radical, extremist use of religion is out of bounds, then you can't fight it. No number of bombs or soldiers of whatever nationality are going to accomplish the objective. So I believe the President's putting his finger on exactly the right target. Now, having said that, the United States' role, he is defined very carefully. We are going to be catalyst and assister, but we're not going to replace those who bear primary responsibility. And if you look today at Iraq and Syria, who are the nations most directly involved? Other Sunni Arab nations, other nations in the region, Iran and Turkey.
Yes.
What the task today is to pull together a consensus that dries up the ideological basis of Daesh, the flow of finance and personnel, and gradually brings it down. The military struggle will not solve it. And therefore, we're only going to be
Ambassador,
a part of the answer.
Just to play devil's advocate on this one, why would I not believe, and why would all our viewers not believe, that you're actually palming off your failures? Because America did not do enough. Let's talk about ISIS. America did not do enough to adequately support or train, for example, the Iraqi army in the run-up to the, talk about the withdrawal. You knew exactly what the Iraqi government was up to, how unpopular it was. You did not act. And you could have preempted, and there was a serious miscalculation in the entire American invasion on Iraq. The reason I'm pushing this point is because it has a complete parallel to what is happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, where you speak of an ideological framework, and Obama also spoke about an ideological framework and the fact that we have to strike not just at the terrorists, but at the ideology that drives these terrorists, right? But the people who push that ideology in South Asia are the Haqqani brothers, is the Lashkar-e-Toiba, and for years you allowed the ISI to back them.
2 quick points as I push back. The first point that I ask that you take very seriously is that the United States cannot create an effective Iraqi, Syrian, or any other opposition. We can enable a pushback. We can enable Iraqi forces, and we trained over 250,000 Iraqis and armed them. But we cannot be the political spirit of the country. We can argue, we can try to persuade, but in the end, it's an Iraqi fight and those of the region around it. Second, you make the point about Pakistan and Afghanistan. And there I think you would have to recognize and agree with me that Pakistan is a hugely complicated problem, because it's both an exporter of terror and an enabler in dealing with terror. and you cannot rule out one in favor of the other. If you want to deal with terror that flows out of Pakistan or takes place inside of Pakistan, you need the full cooperation of Pakistan's government and security forces.
We have an issue on that. I'd like to get Richard also. But we have an issue with the fact that you keep Pakistan as an ally on terror despite the fact that Mullah Omar is living there, despite the fact that the person who comes out on those videos, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is operating from there, despite the ISI, which by your own admission is complicit with the Afghan Taliban. So, I find today, and this was the general observation, I don't know what the observation in America is, but the general observation, at least in India and large parts of the world, is that Obama has suddenly woken up to the fact that he's cornered. In the last few years of his presidency, he finds himself in an extremely uncomfortable situation. He's stepping up to the plate and telling the world, come and help me. And people like, in India, countries like India will say, why would we want to be with you here? Because you've not been sincere enough on our concerns. Richard, is that a wrong way to look at it?
I think President Obama is working very hard to avoid the mistakes of his predecessor. And this is what happens in wars. You fail. You take defeats and then you learn again. After all, the Western countries very nearly lost the Second World War and bounced back.
That's right.
I think that what President Obama is doing is saying, this is a long fight, it's an indefinite fight, it will go beyond his own term in office. But he is going to fight this as a limited war, taking limited risks, and he is not going to turn this into another total war, which is what it was presented as back in 2001. And I think that President Obama is balancing fierce domestic pressures with very, very serious global threats. And I think he's walking the best line he can in a very, very difficult time.
I just wish to come in Ambassador Wisner's point and the distinguished professor now. I think there are two or three issues which really the United States is in a bit of a bind trying to confront terror. The first is that the coalition that it's trying to build up in the Arab world is also made up of countries who were until yesterday funding and supporting groups like ISIS. So therefore, those people are dragging themselves reluctantly under American pressure to become part of what now seems to be the good deed to be done. And you have a lot of Arab countries which have traditionally paid the Americans indirectly by buying huge arms exports from America to say that, okay, we are pumping funds into the American industry and America will protect and fight our wars. But you've got a situation now where there is a great deal of reluctance in America to fight wars. And there is a second problem vis-a-vis Pakistan. In the case of Pakistan, the Americans really believed, and for a long time they did, and they were actually hoodwinked by the Pakistani military into believing that the military in Pakistan was really on their side, when the military, at the end of the day, in a funny way, like the Americans, was following its own agenda.
Well, so, I actually think what both of you gentlemen are saying about Pakistan is correct. And I think that if you asked American policymakers, they would say, yes, it took them a while to realize they were being lied to consistently, but they did finally figure it out. The problem is, once they had figured it out what to do, and so you might say the United States focused on Afghanistan because it could, and it didn't focus on Pakistan because it couldn't. And so I think that Pakistan, as Ambassador Wisner said, it's not just complicated, it's an almost intractable problem. I mean, the Pakistanis have now realized they themselves made a pact with the devil, and they've realized it rather late in the game. And so if there was some solution whereby the United States could somehow cause Pakistan to crack down on those terrorists, that would have been good.
James, you believe that there is no such solution? That really America is that?
Tell me, what's the solution?
All the money that's been pumped into Pakistan is American dollars.
Right. And
the only upsurge in the Pakistani economy has been in the 60s, when America started funding money there, when they pulled out the Pakistani economy tanked. You have the levers of power. I just want to.
I'm underestimating enormously America's power. I think in everything you said.
Would you at least say today, James, that they have been an extremely unreliable and untrustworthy so-called ally in the war against?
Dreadful. To call them an ally is an exaggeration.
So is it time to sort of either do away with or redo this dysfunctional relationship?
So what good does that do? Doing away, say, okay, Pakistan, you're not our friend. How is that going to help?
Well, I think no, one sec, James. Let's go across to Dr. Walter Anderson. Dr. Anderson, sorry for making you wait out there for so long. I mean,
that's okay. I found the debate fascinating.
What do you make of the conversation so far? If this question were to be put to you, that from an Indian perspective, we believe that the time has come for America to, of course, reassess its own role in the war on terror, but at the same time, approach its role in the past with some honesty. I mean, we in India believe that America's entire approach has been rather myopic and short-sighted. Would you agree?
Well, to a certain extent, that's true. It has, but much of that depends on American politics, and we are a democracy where views count. And Ambassador Wisner knows as well as I, and I worked with him once at the State Department. Policymakers have a range of issues they have to juggle in what they handle. And so when you had 9/11, Afghanistan, someone had said, we took action because we could. Actually, it was stronger that we took action because we had to. There was an attack in the U.S. that had its roots there, and so we had to respond in some way. Pakistan decided, President Musharraf at the time, to come on our side, but at the same time, there were elements within his government, particularly ISI, who were not at all enthusiastic about abandoning the Taliban inside Afghanistan. And I don't think it's not because the U.S. didn't realize it, or U.S. intelligence didn't realize it, but as they juggled priorities, they had to sort of consider how Pakistan could be used to help us in getting supplies and equipment into Afghanistan, and other things where it could be helpful. At the same time, we also know that they played, in many ways, a Janist-faced game there. And for people who had to debate the policy on this, there was a juggling. They were not unaware of it, but they had to make a decision as to how they were going to handle that. And I think if you take the relationship of the United States with India on this sort of question, the U.S. and India have, in many ways, at least on the intelligence issue, become closer and closer. And it really started in many ways when I was still in the State Department at the time of Kargil, when the U.S. approach to the issue of Kashmir and Pakistan on that issue really changed from one that was a predominant vision of self-determination to the issue of terrorism. And I'm not in a position to know the extent of cooperation we have with the Indians on intelligence collection and sharing, but I suspect it's quite a lot.
Yeah. Maruf wanted to come in. Yeah, Maruf.
Mr. Anderson, I mean, you're talking of intelligence cooperation. I mean, let's give one example, and that's the one which is really talked about in the Indian media again and again, the David Headley case. I mean, it's very, very important for us in India to get the entire set of transcripts, an entire set of attested claims by David Headley, which is crucial to our case on Pakistan's involvement in 26/11. But, because he was a double agent, and that's public, it's in public domain, a lot of stuff that he has said is being guarded or shielded, primarily either to give him protection under an arrangement that he has with the intelligence agencies here, or basically not to embarrass those who were using him both in the United States and in Pakistan. And so therefore, I mean, our personal, the Indian sentiment about Pakistan and the involvement in 26/11 and American assistance to that effect, we are a bit wary about to what extent has that intelligence cooperation worked. Would you like to counter this view?
Well, I don't think either of us are in a position to know exactly how much cooperation there is. My guess is it is considerable that's going on, and this is not the sort of thing that ever gets out into the open. But given the fact that both of our countries have experienced terrorism and feel a certain similarity in the threat, and the threat to a certain extent originates in Afghanistan and Pakistan, there is, a real reason to cooperate on this. And let's take the present Indian government of Prime Minister Modi. I think Prime Minister Modi, it's slightly shifting the conversation a little bit. truly wants to have closer relations with Pakistan, as you could see in the May 26th invitation to Nawaz Sharif and the long conversations the next day. And I think he thinks that economic cooperation will bring the two together in ways that hopefully Pakistan will crack down on terrorism that originates there against India. But he's willing to be tough if things don't move in that direction. And you can see that when the High Commissioner in Delhi, the Pakistani High Commissioner, decided to talk to secessionists, and the Indian government said, you either talk to us or the secessionists, but you can't talk to both. And I think that reflected a kind of toughness on the issue of terrorism that India is going to demonstrate, I think, under this Prime Minister.
Well, I'd like to think that is a correct perspective. But Ambassador Richard, the reason Maruf is drawing this discussion back to the Indian context is because it reflects the duality of the American approach. For example, in his speech at the UNGA, passing references to al-Qaeda. Why, Ambassador? Al-Qaeda is a real and present threat, especially for India and the South Asian subcontinent. It's getting patronage in Pakistan. Why is there only a passing reference to it now?